recording, okay?
Yes, sir.
Good morning, friends. Let me welcome you to another session of our discussion on the selected poems of W.B. Yeats. As you all know that I have discussed the poems, the 5 poems selected for your study, namely Leda and the Swan, Easter 1916, The Second Coming, The Circus Animals Desertion, and Among School Children. Now, today I will actually deal with the topics that I find very important for your study, at least for this session. Now, I have already told you that you are required to prepare a response to a critical response to the individual poems. Because this is for your examination, and because you don't know, and you are not supposed to know, the ultimate drift of the question or questions. So I would like you to prepare your response, your considered critical response to each of the poems in a comprehensive way, so as to highlight all the important aspects of the poems concerned that you find that you notice. Now, I have actually circulated 8 discussion topics along with the 5 poems that should be discussed. There are 3 other general questions or topics or issues that I would like you to mull over. Namely, to consider Yeats as a moralist poet, to consider Yeats as a personal poet, and also to analyze and to comment upon Yeats's exploration of the theme of memory in his poems. Since these 3 last general questions or topics will all be adequately discussed when we know our poems that we are going to study or that we have studied, and we have to draw insights and information from the individual poems on our syllabus in order to answer the other questions, in order to discuss the other topics. Because obviously, our discussion of Yeats's treatment of memory or Yeats's attitude to modernism will all have to be discussed with special reference to the poems that are on our syllabus. So let me begin today's discussion by dealing with the poems as such. Let me see how many I can tackle today, because there are 5. Let me begin by taking up for discussion Leda and the Swan. We all know that the story of the poem Leda and the Swan was taken by Yeats from the repertoire of Greek mythology. It's a mythological tale whereby how a mortal beauty, Leda, the wife of Tyndareus, was basically I would not like to use the word love. It was basically a sexual urge that the king of the gods, Zeus, fell for Leda. And he actually visited Leda in the guise of a swan. Now, the poem actually tackles many issues. For example, there is obviously the issue of crime against women. This was basically a kind of a rape. Because Zeus, the ultra male, didn't consider Leda's willingness or otherwise before having sex with her. Now, along with the physical dimension, there is also another dimension, the dimension of intimidation. The dimension of being dazed. A young, beautiful girl like Leda, who was also a wife of Tyndareus, is really taken aback when she is visited by this swan. Enormously powerful and strange. Mind well, this is a swan visiting her and forcing her to have sex with him. So this power is something that actually intimidates the girl. And here, another thing needs to be pointed out. The speaker actually refers to the loosening thighs. How far, how long can somebody resist? Because there is power and powerlessness, a hierarchy. The male is powerful physically, and the woman is powerless. So obviously there is some kind of an inequality. And then there are other issues. What about the ultimate result of such a forcible act? You see, Yeats shows his great poetic skill by simply hinting at certain things without describing them in detail. He doesn't talk about the birth of Helen and Clytemnestra and Castor and Pollux. He doesn't say that. What he does is actually, he simply refers to one of the ultimate results. It is because of this that the Trojan War is fought. It is because of this that Agamemnon dies. We all know how Helen of Troy was instrumental in causing the Trojan War, and how in league with her paramour Aegisthus, Clytemnestra, the slighted wife of Agamemnon, and the vengeful mother of Iphigenia, whom Agamemnon had apparently slaughtered or sacrificed. Now, we have read in Aeschylus's play Agamemnon how Agamemnon is killed by Clytemnestra. So this is also hinted at. And then the poem ends with a very, very significant or pertinent question. Did Leda imbibe the knowledge and power when she was having sex with Zeus? So this is very significant because, you know, in a way, if you think about the background to this poem, you will understand that aggression, use of force, militarism, all these things were very much in evidence in Europe of the time. We have to remember the background of the First World War. Okay. Now, it is true that the First World War was fought between 1914 and 1918. But you know, the situation that caused the war was slowly built up. And you know, the identification of male aggressiveness with militarism is something that other poets have also referred to. People like Ted Hughes in Hawk Roosting, or even Elizabeth Bishop in, say, The Roosters. This particular fact is very much to be encountered. It's on the surface. How just as sexual aggression and militarism, military aggression, is akin to each other, similarly, imposition upon the female and imposition upon the country, upon the earth, that is also in some ways similar. So here, what Yeats does is to take his cue from a mythical story, a myth, to be precise. And Yeats actually writes a poem based on the myth, and in so doing, he also gives us a commentary about contemporary Europe. In the grip of war, in the grip of ambition and aggression, and the utter disregard of the will of the weak. This is also something that we have to take into account. The next poem that we are going to discuss is obviously Easter 1916. While discussing the poem, I had told you in no uncertain terms that this is basically about a historical fact. Now, Yeats actually deals with the past in two ways. By talking of myth and by talking of history. Now, obviously, the response is twofold. Individual response and the collective response. So obviously, memory here operates both as individual memory and collective memory. So in this particular poem, Yeats is remembering the heroes of the Easter Uprising. The speaker here talks about his own sense of awe and wonder. Awe and wonder when the Easter 1916, after uprising, took place. He was flummoxed by the fact that in a place where motley is born, where everybody is basically supposed to be very, very casual, such an enormously significant and passionate response could have been manufactured, could have emerged. So the emergence of Irish nationalism that wanted to be free from foreign rule, the British yoke, that is important. And just look at it. These leaders of the uprising, some of them had kept a school, some of them were associated with literature. So in a way, they had tried to spread the national awareness, consciousness amongst their fellow Irishmen, their compatriots, with the help of education, with the help of art and culture and literature. But ultimately, this desire to find out and assert the Irish uniqueness that led to a military uprising. It is true that this uprising had a very, very far-reaching impact and led to the ultimate independence or freedom of at least a part of Ireland in the form of the Irish Republic. But Yeats is here referring to this particular uprising he is mourning the heroes of the uprising. He is recounting the uprising. And his attitude is ambivalent. He is fascinated by, he is impressed by the spirit of selfless patriotism shown by the leaders of the uprising. But at the same time, he is none too happy. He is not impressed by their foolhardiness. Because the British might was something that these revolutionaries had not taken into account. And Yeats, the sage, the conservative, oldish man, has become more tutored by a life full of ups and downs. And as a result, he is cautious. And he thinks that the kind of sacrifice that these heroes made and the way it could affect the population, his own near and dear ones like Montgon, this was something that he considered to be a bit foolhardy and even silly. So thereby the poem becomes at once a praise of Irish nationalism and at the same time a critique of Irish nationalism. Yeats, the cautious oldish man and the sage poet, thinker, considers both sides of the thing, of the event. The next poem that we are going to discuss will be the second coming. You know, the second coming was out and out a post-First World War poem. So in a way, Yeats is worried about the sorry situation prevalent in Europe of his time. It was basically a Christian continent. Christianity was a prevalent religion. I have already told you yesterday during a casual discussion, I had pointed out that, Yeats had a theory of gyre. Yeats seemed to think that historical epochs roughly occupy a period of, say, 2000 years. And the gyre was basically a spiral. There was a beginning. There is usually an apex, the topmost point of civilizational progress, and then there is also a gradual but inevitable winding down. So 20 centuries of stony sleep is about to end. And the second coming is at hand. Why is it so? Because things have fallen apart. And the center is unable to hold. And mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. It is at such time that a new purging takes place. Things are purified. The old is destroyed. And the new is ushered in. You remember Shelley's Ode to the West Wind? The destroyer and the preserver? So in a way, destruction is at hand. The old order has to change. As Tennyson has pointed out in his In Memoriam. So in a way, you will see that from the Spiritus Mundi, the storehouse of collective images, in a way, the collective unconscious. What comes out is a manifestation of human dread and apprehension. And that is the rough beast. And ultimately, shadows reel. The desert birds are even worried. And a shape pitiless, almost sphinx-like, emerges and slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. Okay. I am going to send you certain materials that will help you in understanding this particular thing. Now, why am I saying this? Because one of you had pointed out that she was unable to understand how I could read the second coming as an apocalyptic vision. Because, you are not being able to make sense of this concept of apocalypse. You have to understand, my dear friends, that the vision is apocalyptic. The destruction of Christian values. Ultimately, it will lead to a complete overthrow of a particular order of things. You have to understand that the second coming is not something that is going to come out of the blue. There are symptoms that shows that the second coming is at hand. For example, the fact that things have fallen apart. Things fall apart and center cannot hold. The falcon cannot hear the falconer. So obviously the Christian image. I will refer you to a poem by Gerard Manley Hopkins. I'm talking, about the Winover. So obviously, this is something that makes the poet at once cynical and resigned to what will be. The next poem that I am going to talk about is the Circus Animals desertion. Who are the circus animals? Why are they kept? Animals are kept in circus, in a circus, so as to mount a show, to entertain people and cause the circus coffers to be filled. By the paying spectators. Now, in this particular poem, Yeats talks about his poetic self. Because this is one of the very last poems of Yeats that was composed before his death in 1939. Yeats is an old man. The poet speaker seems to suggest that he has lost his creative fire and verve and vigor. He has sought a new theme for a new poem, but he has failed because his creative vitality is at a low ebb now. But because of this, and because of the fact that he cannot go on living without writing, poetry is a part of his life, the poet speaker's life. So writing poetry is something that he cannot just eschew. He has to go on trying to write a poem. So he thinks that he can write about his own earlier works. In Shesher Kobita, through the character of Amit Rai, Rabindranath Tagore has actually shown us or pointed out a specific problem that an aged poet may face. He says that কবি মাত্রার প্রয়োজন বা উচিত একটা নির্দিষ্ট সময় ধরে কবিত্ব করা. A poet has to write poetry for a particular period of time. And if he is a long-lived poet, he begins to steal from his own poetic oeuvre. চুরি করে. And he becomes, in the words of Rabindranath, receivers of stolen property. But one thing you have to understand. ultimately he has to find out the path ahead, what he has to do in his own heart. So he talks about 3 specific works that he had already written. The Wanderings of Poesy, Countess Kathleen, and On Bailey's Strand. You know, an atmosphere of disturbance and foreboding is very much there in this poem, because not only is this poem a product of an experience, the experience of the First World War, but also a product of foreboding, the foreboding about the Second World War. Every letter should start from a heart. So any poetic soaring of imagination has to emerge from the poet's emotional response to the world outside and the realization of his place in the world. But because Yeats is a personal poet, memories of his own life, memories of near and dear ones like Maud Gonne, always cloud his memory, his response to both the past and the present. And this is what I am going to talk about in my next meeting with you, when I will deal with among school children. Okay, here ends my discussion for the day. But if you have any queries or comments to make, you are welcome.
Sir, I would like to know about the Tagore's specific statement that he made in Sister's Kavita, the receiver of his stolen, what it was something.
No,
when a poet is writing a poem for a long time.
Yes, what happens is, when a poet, according to Rabindranath, but ultimately, in Shesher Kavita, there is a tussle. Even though this does not directly has any bearing on this particular poem, I had incidentally referred to it. But you have to understand that when Rabindranath was writing his Shesher Kavita, at that time, during his lifetime, Rabindranath had, it is true, an amazing impact and popularity. But there were detractors of Rabindranath. Amit Roy and the fictitious poet Nivaran Chakraborty that Amit Roy frequently refers to is basically Amit Roy himself. It is a kind of a fictitious persona. Nivaran Chakraborty seems to suggest that Rabindranath has become old and old fogey. He is not up to date anymore. And in a way, Amit Roy points out, Amit Roy is a character over here. That ultimately, if someone like Rabindranath, actually there is a meta-fictional reference to Rabindranath in this particular, work. If someone like Rabindranath lives for a long time and writes for a long time, what happens is he or she begins to steal ideas and even passages from his or her own earlier works. That is why they are called receivers of stolen property, stolen from themselves. A kind of a self-plagiarism. But what happens afterwards? If you read Sheshar Kavita, you will know. I don't know whether you have read this novel or not. Have you?
No, sir.
In that case, it will be very difficult for you to make sense. So, you see, ultimately, it so happens that Amit Roy reverts to Rabindranath's poetry. So, in spite of an initial opposition, there is an ultimate or eventual acceptance of Rabindranath by Amit Roy. নিবারণ চক্রবর্তী যেদিন ধরা পড়েছে সেদিনই মরেছে, তাই তোমার কবির কথা থেকে তোমাকে কিছু লিখে পাঠালাম। So ultimately there is an acceptance. That was in a way Rabindranath's way of responding to, giving a rejoinder to his detractors. Now Yeats too, you have to understand, Rabindranath and Yeats were very good friends. Yeats has written the introduction to the English translation of Gitanjali, for example. You know that. So,
yes,
I was just referring to the kind of a same feeling that the two friendly poets had towards the fag end of their lives. So that is what I wanted to point. Any other question?
so, sir, even columnist Chandril Bhattacharya once in his interview accused Rabindranath Tagore of plagiarizing his own works. Is that it is kind of relatable to the lecture?
No, the thing is, you know, Chandril Bhattacharya, I don't know whether he is aware of this. Parody and pastiche. Parody and pastiche is also a part of a writer's repertoire. And I will tell you to read about, to learn these two concepts, parody and pastiche. It is quite common for writers to revisit and review their own works at a more mature period of their lives. Because you have to understand that man, being sentient, cannot remain the same. He grows with time. So whatever he has written at a particular time, how he has written it, he often goes back and tries to revise, because the same subject will elicit different response from a same person with the change of time and perspective. If you, for example, read, say, someone among you is a poet. If you read a poem that you may have written when you were only a student of class 8 or 9, you will see that there will be aspects of the poem that you will like to revisit, review, revise. This is not only something that comes with the growing linguistic competence. It is also something that comes because of changing perspectives. It's not that you have learned the language better and that's why you want to revise. It is more fundamental than that. Because we all know that ultimately our attitude to life also changes with the passage of time. As we mature, as we learn in the hard and tough school of life, we revise our opinions. We fine-tune our perspective. And it is a continuous process. It is not that you will grow up to this particular time. It's not like physical growth, that it will stop. And the later growth will be only negligible. Yes, your hair will grow even after you cut it. Your nails will grow even after you cut it. Then your blood will be new blood will be manufactured with the passage of time. But our physical growth actually almost stops after we reach a particular time. And then there is the onset of decay. But it is not the same with our intellectual acumen. It is not the same with our sense. Any other question?
Sir, I would like to know about the Olympians and the Titans. As we know, there was a war between Olympians and Titans where Zeus overthrew his father Cronus. So, sir, what was the reason behind it, sir? Because sir, Zeus to ওরই ছেলে ছিল তো স্যার ওর তো এমনি স্যার
You see, there is something called generational conflict. There is something called generation gap. Power is something that makes man ambitious. Power is something that makes man ambitious. I'm repeating it. And ambitious is something that makes man restless. And restlessness is something that makes man violent. So in a way, Zeus was actually unhappy with the reign of Kronos. And it was not only Zeus. His band was unhappy with the Titans. The old order changed, yielding place for the new. So that is there. Their outlooks on life and the world were different. And don't you see the same thing in today's politics also? We see that. In Indian context, in the Indian context, you think about the Rajas or the Nawabs. You'll see the same thing happen. Think about Bimbishar and Ajatashatru. You think about the Delhi Sultanate. You will see this. There is a power struggle. Now, even though it was not directly related to this particular poem, most of your questions today have been, in a way, extraneous. They are not directly related to the poem that we have discussed just now, or the poems that we have discussed just now. So if you have got any other relevant questions, you may ask. Otherwise, Shamim will remove me from this meeting.
Okay, sir.